Carey's Trailer Park in 1984, sir.
Okay. And that was after the murder of Timothy Coggins.
Yes, sir.
Did you know anything about that murder at the time when you moved to Carey's Mobile Home Park?
No, sir, I was 15 years old. I didn't know nothing about it. I heard nothing about it. No, sir.
Okay. Did you ever have the occasion to meet Frankie Gebhardt?
Yes, sir. Maybe a year and a half after I moved out to Carey's Mobile Home Park. Yes, sir.
Did you also get to know Bill Moore?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how did you come to know Frankie Gebhardt and Bill Moore?
Through acquaintances through the trailer park, Mr. Carroll, Bobby Carroll, Tim Whaley, just through acquaintances, just through mutual partying and stuff.
Okay. And what kind of place was Carey's Mobile Home Park back in the 80s?
It wasn't very good, sir. It was a bad place. A lot of drugs, a lot of partying.
Okay. Was it a predominantly white trailer park?
Yes, sir. Pretty much all white. Yes, sir.
When you met Frankie Gebhardt, what kind of person was he?
Frankie was he drank a lot, which we all drank a lot. He was just Frankie's real quiet. He was just real temperamental, real quiet guy, you know.
Did he have a reputation in the Sunnyside area that you knew?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, a lot of people was afraid of Frankie. Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you afraid of Frankie?
Yes, sir.
Are you still afraid of Frankie?
No, sir.
During the time that you lived at Carey's Mobile Home Park and had got to know Mr. Gebhardt, did he ever discuss with you the murder of Tim Coggins?
He's made statements, sir, through the years. Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you recall when the first statement he made to you was?
Yes, sir. It was in 1985, sir. I was at a lady's house. We was there partying, me and two ladies and another gentleman. And that night, and Frankie had come up with a Pee Wee Morgan was his name that night, and they had got to arguing in her living room. Well, I didn't know Frankie that good, and I didn't know Pee Wee that good, but it was scaring the girls, and I just volunteered to carry him home, carry Pee Wee home, if he would let me in his car. And so he let me drive his car. And on the way to Pee Wee's, which was just a few miles up the road over on 92 Highway, I got Pee Wee home, but the demo switch didn't work on Frankie's car, so I had bright lighted the Deputy Sheriff Sanders, as a matter of fact, sir. And I went on to Pee Wee's house and dropped him out. Well, when I come back off of 92 on the Cowan Road, I passed Deputy Sanders again, sir, and this time he blue lighted me, and he pulled me over, and he breathalyzed me, and I breathalyzed positive for drinking, sir. I had no driver's license, and there was no proof of insurance that I knew of on the car. So he arrested me and impounded the car, sir. So I had to call
This was Frankie's car.
This was Frankie's car, yes, sir.
You can speak up just a little bit.
Yes, ma'am. It was Frankie's car, yes, sir.
Okay. So you're arrested for DUI, Frankie's car gets impounded, what happens next?
I called my mom the next morning. She comes and picks me up around 11 o'clock the next morning. And so we stopped back by the girl Karen's house to let them know, you know. And when we pull up in the yard, I get out of the passenger side, and when I start up to the door, Frankie comes out the door and shuts the door behind him and stands on the second step. He says, "Where's my fucking car?" And I said, "Frankie, your car got impounded last night. I got pulled over because your demo switch didn't work." He said, "You need to get my car." I said, "Listen, Frankie," I said, "we don't have the money to get it, but we're going to go and get the money up to get it." He said, "You got till 6 o'clock tonight to get my car. And if you don't, the same thing that happened to that nigger, it's going to happen to you and your mama." Well, my mom at that time got real excited. She seen that she couldn't hear, but she could see that me and Frankie was having an altercation. And she told me to get my ass back in the car and let's go.
And that was around 1985?
That was 1985, definite, sir. I just had turned 17. The reason I know is because when Mr. Sanders passed by the Youth Detention Center, I asked him where he was going, and he said, "You're going up on the hill this time."
Were you aware of the death of Timothy Coggins at that point?
I had heard rumors around the trailer park, sir, yes, sir.
Okay. And what did you take it to mean when Frankie said, you better have my car back by 6 o'clock or you'll end up like that?
I took it as a threat, sir.
Okay. Was there ever another occasion where Mr. Gebhardt admitted to you that he had murdered Timothy Coggins?
Yes, sir. On one occasion, we was going to the liquor store, me and Frankie and Wade Carey, and a guy named Billy and his brother-in-law. And we had went to the liquor store and it was at nighttime, and we had took the dirt road over by where they had found Mr. Coggins. And they, on the way back from the liquor store, Wade got to arguing with Billy, and he stopped and put Billy out on the dirt road. Well, Billy was on crutches and had a cast on his leg, and Billy lived next door to me. So I told Billy, I said, look, I'll come back and get you. Well, when we got up to the stop sign, Mr. Carey didn't like that, so he told me, he said, look, you can just get out. And I said, I'm not getting out. And so he turned to hit me, and I hit him, sir. I hit him twice in the face. And I got out, but I was scared because Frankie was behind me, and Frankie and Wade was best friends. But Frankie got out with me also. And we was walking down the dirt road, and Frankie said, you knocked the shit out of him. He said, that's the most blood I've seen since I stabbed that nigger 25 times and cut him up. And that was it, sir.
Was there ever a time when you were living in Carey's mobile home park where law enforcement was called out there about Frank?
Yes, sir. Frankie was having an altercation inside the trailer park with a female on the second road of the trailer park. Well, I was across the street on this side of the road, and him and this lady was on the other side of the road. And the sheriff's department had been called. Well, when the sheriff car pulled up, we were standing in the yard, and the deputy sheriff got out of the driver's side and went down to go to speak with Frankie. And Frankie hollered up and told him if he come down in his yard, he'd do the same thing to him he did to the other nigger. And the deputy sheriff left, sir.
So a black deputy sheriff's called
Black
out to Carey's
deputy
mobile
sheriff.
home park,
Yes, sir.
and then Mr. Gebhardt threatened him,
Yes, sir.
and that deputy turned around and left.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Sturgill, was there a time when you were living in Gay, Georgia, when Mr. Gebhardt come and visited you at that time?
Yes, sir, he did, sir. Yes, sir, he did.
Was there anything that he said during that occasion?
He didn't like it because I lived in an all-black neighborhood, sir.
What did he say to you?
He just said he didn't see how I could stand to live around all them niggers, that he knew, that I knew he didn't, that he hated niggers and that what he had did to the nigger on the dirt road.
Was it widely known in the Sunnyside area that
Yes, sir.
Frankie Gebhardt had killed Timothy
Your Honor, I'm
Coggins?
going to object to that.
Sustained.
Did it seem like Mr. Gebhardt openly bragged about this murder?
He would speak of it openly. He wouldn't brag, but he would speak of it. Yes, sir. He would smile when he spoke of it. It didn't bother him.
Did he say it around other people?
Yes, sir, many times.
Mr. Sturgill, why didn't you come forward and let law enforcement know about this when you heard it?
Because up until later in the year, sir, I moved away after I had turned about 18, 19 years old. But up until later in the late 90s, I had thought that the case had been, I thought it was that he had beat the case, sir. I actually thought that he had been to court and beat it, because all I ever heard was how Frankie got away with it.
Were you ever afraid to come forward?
No, sir, because I didn't know no, sir, I wasn't afraid to come forward. I might have been, yes, sir. I mean, I don't know, because at the time I thought that he had already been charged with it and beat the case, yes, sir.
Mr. Sturgill, do you want to be here today?
Yes, sir.
By testifying, are you putting your life at risk?
Very much so, sir.
Okay, explain that.
Now I got to go back into the prison system, sir. I still got a couple of years to do. once I get back into that prison system, if it gets out that I took this stand, then I'm in very, very bad risk, sir.
Okay. And you realize that this trial is being televised, correct?
Yes, sir, I understand that. Yes, sir.
Are there inmates in the prison where you at right now that are aware of this trial?
Yes, sir, very much. There's a lot of it, Georgia inmates in this Florida Correctional Institution, sir, that received the Atlanta Constitution, and that all their family lives around these parts, sir.
That's all my questions are this week.
You may cross.
Good morning, Mr. Sturgill. The state doesn't have jurisdiction over the offense that you're in prison for, is that correct?
No, sir, that's right.
Okay. But the state can notify the federal officials, and if you were to get any consideration on your sentence, they could do it that way, is that correct?
I'm not sure if the state can do that or not, sir.
Okay. You don't know of any reason that the state can't inform the federal officials of your cooperation, right?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. And you got 27 years and you've served 16.
I've served 16, sir, but I received a time cut for drug -2 for being nonviolent, and it took 5.5 years off of me, sir. I have to do 22 years, and I get the good time on that. And I'm fixing to take the drug program, and I'll receive a year off of that too, sir. So I'm approximately 18 months from being out, sir.
Okay. Is that, for the original charge, how much methamphetamine was that you were possessing?
The charge was 500 grams or more. It was enhanced to 72 pounds, sir.
72 pounds of methamphetamine?
Yes, sir.
Okay. It's enough to hurt a lot of people, right?
Very much so, sir.
And I apologize. Well, first of all, when you and I met, when you got here Friday afternoon, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you had a meeting with the state, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you told them what you were going to say, is that correct?
I spoke with him, yes, sir.
Okay. And then you had the opportunity to talk and meet myself and Mr. Johnson, is that
Yes, sir.
correct?
I did, yes, sir.
And you decided not to talk to us, is
Yes,
that
sir, that's right.
right? So you told them the truth, but you did not talk to us, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I apologize, I couldn't hear as well. What was this? You took Pee Wee home from a party? Is that
Yes, sir.
what I gathered? Pee Wee who?
Pee Wee Morgan, sir.
Pee Wee Morgan.
Yes, sir.
You don't know his first name? Or I'm assuming that's not it.
It's not his first name, no, sir. I can't think of it right offhand, no, sir.
Okay, and that was at a party in 1985.
1985, sir.
And that's the night that you got a DUI?
Yes, sir. I got a DUI, yes, sir.
If I had known about that, maybe we could have found Pee Wee Morgan. Is that correct, to verify your story?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
And it was the next morning that Frankie asked you where his car was at, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because you had taken his car and not brought it back, and he didn't know what had happened, right?
He had lent me his car, sir, to take Pee Wee home, sir.
Did you tell the DA's office anything about Frankie telling you that the victim's penis had been cut off or anything like that?
Did I, sir? Yes, sir.
You did tell them that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if that didn't happen, then Frankie lied to you, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you say that a deputy came out, there was some sort of incident at the trailer park, and a deputy came out, and you heard Frankie tell him that if he approached him,
Yes, sir.
then he would do to him what he had done to somebody else.
Yes, sir.
And the deputy, it was a black deputy, is that
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
And then he just turned around and left?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was he in his patrol car?
Yes, sir. He was in a sheriff car. Yes, sir.
Okay. And about what year did that happen?
I would say around approximately 1988, 89, sir.
1988 or 89? That was a deputy obviously responding to a call.
Yes, sir.
And you say that during the time that you lived at Carey's trailer park, Carey's mobile home park, that you had always heard rumors about what had happened?
Yes, sir.
Okay. From lots of different people, is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Don't have anything further?
Mr. Sturgill, all those rumors was Frankie the person that killed Timothy Coggins?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Lee brought up the fact that you told us about Mr. Coggins' penis being cut off. What exactly did you tell me on Friday afternoon about that?
I just said, sir, that I had overheard Frankie tell Mr. Wade Carey one time that if he'd kept his dick in his pants, sir, it wouldn't have ended up in his mouth. That's all I heard, sir.
Now, what did Frankie Gebhardt look like back in the 80s when you got to know him?
Frankie was a good-looking fella, big guy. Real,
Was he muscular,
yeah, very, sir, yes, sir.
stocky?
Real stocky, yes, sir.
That's all my questions, Judge.
Anything else?
I don't think I have any further questions, Joe.
Yeah. You may come down. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Would the state call their next witness, please?
Agent Jared Coleman.
You'll raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in the trial of this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I swear, Your Honor.
You'll have a seat. You'll please state your name for the record.
Jared Coleman.
Agent Coleman, we've heard your name a lot throughout the trial. If you would just introduce yourself to the jury, tell them a little bit about yourself.
My name is Jared Coleman. I'm a special agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. I'm assigned to our Region 2 Investigative Field Office, which is down out of Columbus, Georgia. We cover 13 counties, west central Georgia, all the way from Muskogee County down in Columbus, up to Carroll County, over here to Spalding County, and then down into Taylor County. So we've got a pretty good chunk of the state that we do cover. I'm a graduate of North Georgia College and State University. It's now the University of North Georgia, where I've got a degree in international affairs. Began my law enforcement career in 2010 with the Gwinnett County Police Department. I worked as a patrol officer there. I served in assignments with a unit called the Community Response Team, which is essentially a crime suppression unit, and also had an assignment with the Narcotics and Vice Unit while I was in Gwinnett County. 2015, I was hired on as a special agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, attended Basic Agent Academy, and my first assignment was at the Columbus field office, where I've remained since that time.
Now, in the course of your duties as a GBI agent, are you assigned cold cases?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. First of all, talk to the jury about what a cold case is. They've heard a lot about it, but explain to them what, in the GBI's terms, is a cold case, and how you handle cold cases that you are assigned.
Yes, ma'am. So every field agent within a field office is assigned a county within our region. So right now we have 6 investigative agents, 2 crime scene specialists within our office. Each agent carries 2 or more counties. For example, right now I'm the county agent for Coweta County and Taylor County. But at the time of this investigation, when it was initiated, I was the county agent for Spalding County. We've done a little bit of reshuffling since that time. When you're assigned as a county agent to that county, any cold case homicides that have come out of that county it's your responsibility as the case agent for that county to follow up on those cases. So basically what a cold case is, and within the GBI, all of our homicides that are unsolved, in which all of the investigative leads have been exhausted, are considered cold cases, which essentially means that all the leads that we know of at that point in time have been worked, and we're looking for more information to come in to where we can maybe run down the leads and hopefully make an arrest and solve the case.
And one of the cold cases that you were assigned was the case of Timothy Coggins?
Yes, ma'am.
When did you get that case?
I was assigned the Timothy Coggins murder investigation in June of 2016.
Who had the case before you?
The case was assigned to Special Agent Robert Devane, who is no longer with the GBI.
What was the first thing that you did when you were assigned this cold case?
So when we get assigned a cold case, what we do is something that's called the cold case review process. So essentially we try to examine the case file and get a good grasp of and understanding of what's within the case file. Now granted, we recognize that for the most part, the investigative leads at that point have been exhausted, or we go into the case with that assumption. However, it's our job to look at the information within the case file and see if there are any leads that us, with our new set of eyes looking at the file, may be able to identify that we can move forward with. So what we'll do is we'll look at the interviews that have taken place, we'll attempt to locate any type of evidence that's remaining in the case, and try to get a good understanding. And if we are able to identify any type of investigative leads, we'll try to move forward with those leads.
In your training and experience in your handling of cold cases throughout the review process, are there issues with every cold case?
Yes, ma'am, there are.
What might some of those issues be?
There's a lot of issues that we'll come up with, particularly with cold cases that have such a large amount of time that has passed between the original incident. Like this case, you have witnesses which have passed away and are deceased. We're not able to go out and talk to them again. Some have medical issues which prevent them from recalling certain information. Sometimes evidence is lost, which we've already covered in this case. There are roadblocks that come up in cold case investigations, just outside of the fact that the leads have been exhausted up to that point.
So the first thing that you did in your review process was review the old case file?
That's correct.
Okay. And what did you notice, first off, right off the bat, about the old case file?
I felt like in my examination of the cold case file that the investigation was not a thorough or complete investigation. It was not done to the standards that I would consider properly investigated at the time.
In fact, how long was this investigation?
Officially on paper, the investigation was open from October of 1983 until December of 1983, but the case was effectively concluded on October 25th of 1983.
And when you say effectively, were there a couple of things that were done after that that you didn't think that had any merit?
That's correct. There were a few potential leads that the investigators tried to track down, an individual that they were trying to locate down in Florida, but nothing that was really directly linked to the case.
So your testimony is that from the case began on October 9th and ended on October 25th effectively?
Effectively, yes, ma'am.
But it was officially closed in December?
That's correct.
Give the jury some perspective here, Agent Coleman. Is that a normal amount of time for a murder investigation to be open?
Absolutely not. Our homicide investigations today, if we were to get a call out, a homicide investigation can take anywhere from 2 months to a year before we even turn our case file over to the district attorney for prosecution. Even if we're able to get someone into custody on a homicide the day that the homicide occurs, there's still other leads that we track down, try to locate witnesses, try to obtain additional evidence, try to send the evidence off to the crime lab for additional testing, getting phone records, all kinds of stuff that we have to put together. So even back in 1983, that was a very, very short amount of time for a homicide to be investigated, much less any other case.
Did you feel like the case had potential to be brought before a jury?
Without a doubt.
Okay. We've heard a lot about Mickey Guy. Is a woman by the name of Mickey Ruth Guy mentioned in the old case file?
Yes, her name is actually Ruth Elizabeth Guy, but her nickname was Mickey.
Did you, through the course of your investigation, were you able to determine a description of her?
Yes, we were.
What does she look like?
She was a white female with brown hair, and according to her driver's license information at the time, she had blue eyes.
Okay. The defendant, was the defendant mentioned in the old case file?
He was.
Anywhere in that case file, did the defendant take a lie detector test?
No, we conducted a thorough review of the GBI case file and did not locate any information regarding a lie detector test specifically for the defendant.
So let's start with October 9th of 1983. When did responders arrive on that scene?
I believe that Spalding County was contacted approximately 10:45 a.m. and arrived on the scene shortly thereafter, if I recall correctly.
And you heard testimony that the Agent Peterson did not arrive until much later in the evening.
That's correct.
Now, the crime scene itself, we start there. Your Honor, may he step down?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 31.
Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to review the crime scene?
Yes, ma'am, I was.
In your experience, your training experience, what, if anything, did this crime scene say to you?
So, with this crime scene in particular, it was what we would consider a vast crime scene. There was a lot of information that we were able to learn just by reviewing our crime scene. Particularly, and I believe that Mr. Peterson covered this earlier, but there's significant locations of blood throughout the crime scene. But what was significant to us was this area down here. Now, Minner Road was along the top up here.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I got to think about the record. For the record, when you say down here, you're speaking of the bottom of the exhibit.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So Mr. Coggins' body was located approximately,
I'll hold up State's Exhibit 32.
his body was located approximately 415 feet off of the roadway. Now, we knew that there was a significant amount of blood stains near the roadway. So the question begged to offer based on my review was, how did his body get back there? Now, we know that the beige sweater that you all were able to see photos of earlier was located up here near the roadway, and that there were tire tracks that were right next to the sweater. Now, when we got down to the lower part of the exhibit and began to review, we noted a significant number of drag marks all across this almost square pattern that we were able to observe. Now, there were also multiple blood stains in that square pattern area. So what we were able to conclude most likely occurred, and what the crime scene was consistent was that Mr. Coggins' body had been drugged behind the vehicle based on our tire tracks that we knew were out there, the variety of blood stains, and the square dragging pattern that we were able to note from our crime scene review.
Now, during the course of your investigation, did you perform a search for newspaper articles back in 1983?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And were you able to find newspaper articles regarding this particular incident?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Was there a vast amount of media coverage?
Not a lot. There were a few articles about it, but not what I would call a significant amount of coverage.
I'm going to show you what's been marked State's Exhibits 159 through 163, and I'm going to ask you if you recognize them.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, I do.
Are those the newspaper articles that you obtained in regards to the investigation
Yep.
back in 1983?
Yes, ma'am.
And are they fair and accurate depictions of the articles as retrieved from the archives?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, I will tender State's Exhibit 159 through 163.
And Your Honor, we would object to those coming in. Those are newspaper articles from 1983 written by someone who's not here to testify about them.
For what
They're outside the court hearsay, Your Honor.
For what purpose are they tendered?
Your Honor, they're tendered just to, there's been a lot of discussion about what was put in the media, and this is actually what was put in the media. Obviously, I could bring in the probate court to establish that it is a record that is kept in the archives.
Well, it's going to contain hearsay.
Your Honor, I can just
Very
have him
much.
testify in general about if there are details in there or not.
Okay. I mean, I can envision how it might be relevant, as it
Right.
might have affected any witnesses.
Your Honor, I think the number of
Impression.
articles might be relevant and whether they contain any large amount of details, but the articles themselves would be hearsay, Your Honor.
I can just have him testify, Judge.
Okay. And sustain.
Agent Coleman, those articles, do they contain any mention of dragging?
No, ma'am, they did not.
Okay. Any mention of dragging behind a vehicle?
No, ma'am.
Any mention of specific things found at the crime scene?
Yes, ma'am, there are a few things that are mentioned.
What is mentioned?
There's a mentioning that there were tire tracks at the scene, but nothing about drag marks at the scene. There's a discussion of the fact that Mr. Coggins died as a result of being stabbed.
Any mention of the number of times he was stabbed?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Any mention of anything being carved in his body?
No, ma'am.
In fact, it's fair to say that there is one lengthy article
Yes, ma'am.
that would, I guess, be on the bottom of the front page, it appears. But after that, the articles are merely a paragraph looking for identification and then announcing that the victim was identified as Tim Coggins.
That's correct.
And that's it.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, there was a lot of evidence recovered from the scene as testified by Mr. Peterson.
There was evidence that was recovered from the scene. I wouldn't particularly describe it as a lot of evidence, but there was some evidence.
I understand. The evidence that was recovered that we have here today, you've seen and the jury has seen.
Yes, ma'am.
You have the blue jeans, the underwear, and the rock.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you try to find the rest of the evidence?
I was not the one who tried to locate it. That was Special Agent Daniela Stewart.
But you did go to the archives in an attempt to find some of it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you did speak with the sheriff's office to confirm that they had looked again and not found anything?
I did.
Did you also reach out to the GBI to try to find the missing evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Did that stop you? This was early on in your investigation.
That's correct.
You realize at this point that there is evidence missing.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you stop investigating this murder?
No, ma'am. We felt that the case was still very much solvable.
And explain to the jury why you felt that way.
Well, there were numerous leads that I identified based on the testimonial evidence that I was able to locate within the case file. And I believe that there was still evidence out within the community to still be located even after 34 years.
Okay, so it seems like you're telling the jury that you thought that interviews could help develop leads.
Absolutely.
Is that uncommon in a cold case?
No, it's not. In fact, I read an article from National Geographic that quoted
Your Honor,
that.
I'm going to object here. This is hearsay.
Yeah, just in your training and experience, is
Yes,
it
ma'am.
uncommon?
No, it's not uncommon. The majority of our cold cases are either reinitiated or solved based on the heels of new testimonial evidence from witnesses.
So not DNA evidence?
That's correct.
The victim's attire, what he was wearing at that crime scene, what did you know in the course of your investigation that the victim was wearing and what the jury's heard through Talicia Coggins?
Yes, ma'am. If I can just review my notes. So Ms. Coggins, during our interview with her, noted that Timothy Coggins was wearing a beige or cream color sweatshirt, which was consistent with the one that we found, which was observed out on the scene at that time, and then a white shirt underneath that.
And you had the blue jeans and the underwear.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you recover, or was there, sorry, not you, you're ashamed you weren't born.
No, ma'am, I wasn't.
Did you recover any footwear from the scene?
From the scene in 1983?
Was there footwear recovered from the scene?
No, ma'am. Shoes and socks and then a white T-shirt were never located on the crime scene.
Okay, what about any weapon?
A weapon was not, a knife was not collected on the scene.
Okay. And there's been some mention of cartridge casings that were recovered from the scene. Anything in your investigation indicate that Timothy Coggins was shot at all?
No, ma'am. In fact, based on our review of the information, that was an area where people would go out and shoot and hunt at the time, so it wouldn't be inconsistent with finding shell casings out at that location.
And you've heard the testimony. You've heard testimony that the defendant stated that the victim was chained to the back of a truck and was drugged.
Yes, ma'am.
Was a chain recovered from the scene?
In 1983?
Yes.
No, ma'am.
Before we move on from 1983 and the crime scene, you mentioned that it was bloody and there were drag marks. Would you classify this agent as a violent crime scene? It
was an extremely violent crime scene.
Okay, and what, in your training and experience, what does that say to you as an agent when you were investigating a crime?
Yes, ma'am. It means to us, based on our training, that there was some type of connection between the victim and the assailant, that there was some connection of passion as opposed to something simple like a drug deal gone wrong, which where we'll generally see 1 or 2 shots to a victim. This crime scene indicated that the killing was very personal.
Okay, by passion, do you mean anger?
Yes, ma'am.
During the course of your investigation, did it appear to you, in your training and experience, that this scene was meant to send some type of message?
Objection, Your Honor, it's speculation.
In his training and experience as an investigator?
Overruled.
Thank you.
Yes.
And did that affect how you proceeded with your investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
After reviewing the case file in 1983, what did you do next? And I'm sorry, it's a broad question, I'll narrow it a bit for you. Did you begin looking at steps that had been taken since 1983?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what were those?
Special Agent Stewart had attempted to identify and locate evidence that was remaining from the case from 1983. Intelligence was collected. We were trying to figure out at this point who was alive and who was dead. And then we began to see what steps had been taken to update the case file since it had been reopened, and we were able to identify some leads that could be followed up on.
Okay, and was one of those leads Christopher Vaughn?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
Did you review the interviews of Christopher Vaughn?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask you, are the recordings still there from 2005, 2007? Are those recordings available, or are you looking at summaries?
Investigative summaries, as far as I know, the interviews were not audio recorded at that point in time.
Okay. Talk to the jury a little bit about interviews. When you are conducting an interview, what's your training and experience regarding interviewing a witness or even a defendant?
Yes, ma'am. So when we go into agent school with the GBI, we take approximately a week-long course on interviews and interrogations, as well as typing up summaries and case files. And we're taught to try to get as much information as we can. And then the information that we get is translated into what's called an investigative summary. So an investigative summary is not the end-all be-all. It's not a transcription of every single thing that was said. It is a reflection of the interviewer's understanding of the information gained during the course of the interview. Now, in today's time, every interview that we conduct within the GBI is either audio or video recorded. So if there's any question about what was said between the person being interviewed, whether they be a witness, a victim, or a defendant, we can go back and listen to the audio recording and say, yes, this is what was said, no, this is not what was said. However, at this point in time, particularly the 2007 and 2008 interviews that I reviewed, there was no audio recording. So what we have to go off of is what's typed in the summary. So that, unfortunately, that does sometimes leave open some questions regarding the agent's interpretation of the information that he received, and also what type of questions were submitted to the witness to elicit certain response, or whether a question was submitted to the witness that you're speaking to, if it would have elicited any type of response, period.
Okay. Christopher Vaughn was interviewed multiple times.
Yes, ma'am.
And by many investigators.
That's correct.
And 2 investigators for the GBI.
No, ma'am, more than that.
3, I'm sorry, 3 prior to you, is that correct? Agent Duran, Agent Beatty, and then Robert Devane?
That's correct.
Okay. Is it Did these investigators, even with the GBI, as they're interviewing Christopher Vaughn over the years, did you see any follow-up, any significant follow-up on his interviews to try to corroborate some of these details?
There was not any significant follow-up, no ma'am.
Okay, so it's fair to say that he's interviewed and then there's really not a lot of follow-up on those interviews?
That's correct.
Okay. I said a term, corroborate. That's a term that we use a lot, law enforcement, legal, it's a legalese, if you will. Explain to the jury what I'm talking about. When I'm saying were any attempts made to corroborate his statement,
Yes, ma'am.
what does that mean?
So when we talk about corroboration of statements, basically what we're talking about is the validation of a statement. Are we able to find another witness who saw something or heard something similar? Are we able to find some type of physical evidence that would lend to the credibility of the witness? So we're not just relying only on the statement coming from the witness. We're able to say, yes, person A said this, but person B saw or heard something similar, so it lends us to believe the statement that's coming from this individual.
Okay. Do you expect when you interview multiple people to find some inconsistencies?
Yes, ma'am. It's all about points of view and your understanding of what you were seeing. For example, if I were to ask the three gentlemen on the back row right there to write me a story of the testimony that they heard on Friday, you would get essentially the same story, but there may be some minor inconsistencies of what they remembered, exactly what they recalled, what people were wearing, so on and so forth. So you will see minor differences or possible inconsistencies in that, but essentially the message does tend to remain the same.
And in all of Christopher Vaughn's interviews, including the interview with you, was there something consistent emerging out of his interviews?
Absolutely.
And what was that consistency?
That consistency was that the defendant, Mr. Gebhardt, was angry, he was racist, and that he killed the victim, Timothy Coggins.
And that he had admitted to it?
Yes, ma'am.
Had he provided details to Christopher Vaughn that were not made public?
Absolutely.
And what does that say to you in your training and experience?
Well, it provides some validity to the statements of Mr. Vaughn, particularly the information that was given to us by Mr. Vaughn was consistent with our crime scene, which when we're talking about corroboration, the physical evidence lended itself to the credibility of the story. And it's something that we call guilty knowledge, which is something that only the person who perpetrated the crime would know. For example, we're talking about the fact that Mr. Coggins' body was drugged, information that was never released out to the public. So the person, well, we're able to conclude more likely than not that the person who committed that crime would have that information, and only he or she would be able to convey that to someone else.
In your review of the case file and in your interviews that you did most recently, the individuals that found the crime scene, any indication that they recognize those details?
No, ma'am.
You interviewed a lot more people than Christopher Vaughn.
Oh, yes.
Okay, can you tell the jury about how many people you interviewed in connection to this case?
Myself and Captain Morris personally interviewed upwards of 50 people in this investigation. In totality, including the 1983 case file, upwards of 120 people were investigated.
Okay.
Or excuse me, interviewed.
You interviewed a man by the name of Robert Smith,
Yes, ma'am, I did.
and you heard his testimony today.
Not today.
I'm sorry, not today, this, last week.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. In his interview with you, did he mention seeing Timothy at a trailer park on Wood Road?
No, he did not.
And is it uncommon in your training and experience for witnesses to remember details and add them later on?
No, not at all. In fact, it goes back to what I was talking about with interview techniques and eliciting a line of question to bring forward a certain response. For example, if you were to ask me what I had for breakfast yesterday, I may say, well, I don't know what I had for breakfast. But if you were to ask me, well, you had McDonald's for breakfast yesterday, didn't you? And it may jog my memory and say, yeah, I had an Egg McMuffin with no cheese, you know. It's all a question of what elicits certain memories and responses. And certain investigators will ask a certain line of questioning which may jog memories, whereas another investigator may not ask that line of questioning. But what we look for when we're talking with someone is inconsistencies. Now, there's a difference between an inconsistency and new information. An inconsistency would be that if I asked you where you were last night between 5 and 7,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this line. It's up to the jury to decide if someone has made an inconsistent statement. In fact, you're going to charge them on that later on, Your Honor.
You don't know that he's saying whether a witness has made one or not as much as he is explaining inconsistencies in
Your Honor,
general.
he's giving a definition of a legal term, Your Honor. If he's not a lawyer, you're going to talk about inconsistencies and inconsistencies in statements.
He can briefly describe inconsistencies as it relates to law enforcement, interrogations or questionings.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay.
You just finish it.
yes, ma'am. So specifically within law enforcement, what we look for when we use the term inconsistencies is that if you were to ask me where I was between 5 and 7 o'clock p.m. yesterday, and I told you that I was at the Atlanta United soccer game, which I was, and then a few weeks down the road, you interview me again and then ask me again where yesterday between 5 and 7 I was, and I tell you that I was at home watching TV, that's conflicting information during the same time period. But just because if you were to ask me that information and I didn't tell you about it, and then later on we talk about it and I tell you about it, that's not an inconsistency within what we look for in law enforcement. Inconsistencies specifically deal with inconsistent or conflicting information specifically related to a certain time period.
You also interviewed a man by the name of Willard Sanders.
Yes.
Since his testimony, have you had an opportunity to go back and review the recording?
Yes.
At any time, did you tell him a different motive?
No, ma'am. At no point in time did I reveal to Mr. Sanders anything other than the information that Mr. Sanders provided to us.
Okay. Terry Reed, you also had an occasion to interview Terry Reed.
I did.
And Mr. Reed mentioned to you that there was, I believe, a jailer that was passing along information,
He did discuss that, yes, ma'am.
and that was a Zach Whitmer.
Yes, ma'am.
And were you able to substantiate that?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this point. Ms. Broder appears to be impeaching her own witnesses. And that's not allowed on direct, Your Honor. She's not allowed to impeach her own witnesses.
No, I'm certainly not impeaching our own witnesses, Your Honor. I'm just discussing some of the things that came forward in their interviews.
Go ahead, overruled.
Thank you, Judge. And were you able to substantiate that claim?
We were not able to sustain or substantiate the complaint.
Okay, so explain that to me. It just, you couldn't decide either way?
We didn't have any evidence to either say, yes, the complaint was true, or to exonerate the individual.
Okay. Before we move on to the search warrants, fair to say you interviewed a lot of witnesses with colorful pasts, right?
Yes, we, unfortunately, we don't get to choose our witnesses in our cases, ma'am.
Okay. When you say you don't get to choose your witnesses, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, it would be nice if in every case we were able to go out and talk to everyone who was the county pastor and had no past whatsoever, but we don't get to choose that. We get to talk to who's involved regardless of what their past is. You get who you get, as simple as that.
The fact that these witnesses have criminal histories or maybe sordid pasts, did that stop you from continuing with your investigation?
No, it didn't stop us.
Can you inquire as to what number I'm on? Is it 164?
164.
Did you execute search warrants in this case?
Yes, ma'am, multiple.
Did you execute a search warrant at 1704 Patterson Road?
Yes, ma'am, we executed two.
All right. And that's in Spalding County?
It is.
Whose residence is that?
That's the residence of the defendant, Franklin Gebhardt.
Your Honor, I'll note for a record that certified copies of both of these have previously been tendered into the record. We have copies that are not certified because the certified copies have already been placed into the record of prior hearing date.
Your Honor, are you considering those?
Yes.
The only objection we have, Your Honor, is those contain statements by witnesses have not been called here to testify.
We aren't going to send it back with the jury, Your Honor. I just have to place them
Yeah.
into about the search?
Just want to make sure that.
It's at 164 and 165.
Yes, Your Honor.
They're admitted but will not be allowed in the jury room.
Thank you. I'm going to show you both of these.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recognize them?
I do.
And what are they?
These are both applications and affidavits for search warrants as well as issued search warrants through Superior Court of Spalding County.
Okay. And did you draft those?
I did.
And did you provide them to a Superior Court judge?
Yes, ma'am.
And were they signed?
Yes, they were.
And were they executed?
They were.
All right. Your Honor, at this time, I will tender State's Exhibits 164 and 165.
No objection.
Okay.
No.
They're admitted.
Let's start with the first one. The search warrant executed on May 9th of 2017. What was the purpose of that search warrant? What were you looking for?
I don't believe that it was executed on May 9th. I believe May 10th was the date of execution.
Okay. I think
However,
maybe it was signed on May 9th?
yes, ma'am,
All
it
right.
was.
Apologies, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. What we were looking for at that point in time was knives, a chain, clothing which may belong to the victim in this case, and any type of biological evidence. I believe that was all that was on the list.
Okay. What did you recover?
During that search warrant, we wanted to excavate a well which was off the back side of the property, but we were unable to do so because it would have resulted in us having to destroy the structure.
Okay, let's slow down a little bit. Why did you want in that well?
Well, we had received information from multiple witnesses in our case that Mr. Gebhardt had admitted to them that he had thrown the murder weapon down his well.
All right, and you said his well. How many wells are on the property?
There were 3 wells, which was consistent with the information given to us by Mr. Gebhardt in his interview.
Okay. And Mr. Gebhardt or Mr. Vaughn?
Well, Mr. Gebhardt told us that there were 3 wells on his property, but I don't remember if Mr. Vaughn told us exactly 3 or not.
How many of those wells were working? Meaning, how many of those wells were providing water to the structure?
There was only one well that provided water. One of the wells was actually underneath an addition of the house. We were able to identify it through the use of ground penetrating radar to tell that the well was actually there, and then another well was inside of a shed.
Okay.
And it had been filled in.
All right. The well that was inside, I guess it was inside the home. Is that what you mean when you say an addition? Was it an enclosed addition?
Yes, ma'am. The well had been filled in long ago. Concrete had been poured over the top of it, and kind of an add-on like when you see somebody enclose a den or a screened-in porch and put up walls on the back side of the residence. I believe that there were photos that were shown of a door that we went in to clear the structure. That door that we went into was the addition to the back side of the residence.
And then you had the well that had water in it.
Yes, which was located, I'd say approximately 30 feet off the back of that back wall of the
Any of the
residence.
information from these witnesses indicate that that is the well that the defendant had said that the knife was in? and
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am.
Then what well did you want to excavate?
The one that we were going after was the filled-in one, which was within that shed, which we later were able to excavate.
What was the information that you had received that might have been in that well?
So we'd received information that following the murder of Mr. Coggins, that the weapon had been thrown down into the well, and that Mr. Gebhardt had attempted to burn materials down the well in an effort to destroy the knife, and then later filled in the well to prevent anyone from retrieving any type of evidence out of it.
Had you also received any information about potential clothing being in that well?
Not that I recall, other than the fact that the clothing from our victim was missing from the crime scene, particularly the shirt, the shoes, and his socks.
Okay. The first search warrant, how many knives in total did you recover?
Yes, ma'am. There was a total of 63 knives which were recovered from that search warrant. There were 60 within a drawer, 2 which were within a china hutch, the knife which was up on display, and then the weird little double-bladed knife that was up there as well, and then the knife that came out of Mr. Gebhardt's truck, for a total of 63 knives.
Mr. Terry Reed,
Yes, ma'am.
Did he tell you anything about the number of knives recovered?
Yes, ma'am. He told me,
She followed back there. Okay, I think we can continue.
Thank you, Judge.
yes, during my interview with Mr. Reed, he told me that he had received information from Mr. Gebhardt that approximately 60 knives had been recovered during the course of the search warrant, which was significant to us.
Why?
Well, going back to talking about the corroboration of statements, we knew that we had taken approximately 60 knives from the search warrant. So the fact that Mr. Reed was coming out and able to tell us that not only had Mr. Gebhardt admitted to killing the victim to him, but that he's also able to provide us information that, yes, in fact, we took 60 knives from the house helps to corroborate the statement that he was able to provide us, because we knew that that was information which hadn't been put out to the media. We knew it had been communicated to Mr. Gebhardt, so it helped to lend some credibility to Mr. Reed's statement to us.
Talk to me about this bone handle knife that you recovered.
Yes, ma'am.
Why was that significant?
Well, it was significant to us because during our interview with Mr. Robert Smith, who testified earlier in this trial, Mr. Smith talked to us.
I'm going to object. Mr. Smith has testified, and none of this came forward during his testimony.
It'll have to be restricted to what his testimony was.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I don't recall if he testified about the bone handle knife or not. I'll just ask you this, it's just I don't recall, Judge. I don't know if the court recalls. Did you recover it? Let me just ask you that then. Did you recover a bone handle knife?
Yes.
We won't go into it any further. You mentioned earlier about you wanted in the well,
Yes, ma'am.
but you couldn't get in the well.
Not during the time of the execution of the first search warrant.
What were the challenges with getting in that well?
So with the well, it was located about 3 feet off the back of the house. And we have certain policy and regulations when it comes to the excavation of a well, particularly for every 1 foot we go down into a well, we have to go 3 feet out. And that's so that as we're digging down into the well, we don't have it fall in onto us, causing injury, potentially even death. Now, in order for us to do that, at that point in time, we could have gone in there, but if we did, it was going to result in tearing out somebody's driveway, tearing down Mr. Gephardt's house, tearing up the property, everything that was on the property. Because, I mean, your typical well is between 35 to 40 feet, so we're looking at having to go out potentially 120 feet on each side. And the decision was made that we were going to research to see if there was another way that we could get into that well. So we didn't feel like it was, yes, we needed to get in there, but at the same time, it's not reasonable to tear down somebody's house to try to find this evidence. So we began to research and try to find another way to get in that well.
And were you in contact with the department in the GBI or the investigator, I guess, or the agent with the GBI who is your expert in well excavation?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you in contact with the, I guess, upper management of the GBI?
Yeah, you could call it the upper management.
So needless to say, from the first search warrant until the second, you all were trying to find a way to get in this well without tearing down someone's house.
That's correct.
What was the process that was eventually agreed on by all the parties in an attempt to get in the well that was so close to home?
So we decided to move forward with a process that was called hydrovac excavation, which I believe Mr. Greg Dubin talked to you about, his company that he owns.
And did you know that that could hinder the lab from collecting any DNA off of this clothing?
We did, but we had already consulted with the lab, and they told us that they knew that they weren't going to be able to test anything that came out of the well anyway, due to the fact that it had been exposed for over 34 years. So we knew that we had to move forward with trying to obtain the evidence, because if we didn't do it, then the question would be asked, well, why didn't you do it? So we had to move forward with it.
Okay, so correct me if I'm mistaken in your testimony there. The lab had expressed the fact that it wouldn't have tested in a traditional excavation either?
That I'm not sure, ma'am.
So it was after discussing the hydrovac with them,
Yes, ma'am.
they wouldn't test it for the reasons that I believe were testified before the jury.
Yes, ma'am, and we recognized what it was. I mean, we were going in and water was going to be washing through the items that were in there, and potentially, if there was anything to be found, might be what would be considered contamination. However, it came down to the fact of either we leave it in the ground or we don't look at all. Either we don't look at all or we go down and use the means that we have to at least try to locate the items of evidence. So we made the decision to move forward and try to find it.
Okay. The way that this works, I know that we've heard testimony from the owner of the company, but were you able to determine in what year anything was thrown down in the well?
Yes, ma'am. We were able to find some dates on some items that were in the well.
Dating back
From the late 70s all the way up into early 2000s.
okay. And what I mean, and maybe my question wasn't clear, and I apologize, the way that the process worked, was everything separated out or was it mixed together?
No, it was all mixed together.
Okay, so, and what I'm asking is when this pile was dumped, were you able to determine when the shirt or the shoes or any of that was thrown down in the well?
No, ma'am. we
And you
weren't.
couldn't testify about that to this jury?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And that's because of the process?
That's correct.
When the property that was recovered from the well was emptied onto that, I guess you could call it, the area of the sheriff's office?
Yes,
the
ma'am.
parked area. Did you find trash?
Yes, ma'am.
A lot of trash?
Yes, we did.
What about anything that was burned?
Yes, we found a significant amount of burned material within the well as well.
Okay. And the property in the well, what did you find that you determined was of significance to this investigation?
Well, we found a shoe that was significant in this investigation, which had burn marks on the shoe, and we were able to determine that it was size 10.
Okay. Were you ever able to determine a year?
Based on my research into the shoe, I was...
Objection, Your Honor, this officer is not an expert in the manufacture of shoes, as far as I can tell, and also this shoe was sent to the crime lab and a report was prepared, and it did not contain anything about the year of manufacture of the shoe.
Sustained.
Were you able to determine, did you have to find anything else? You found the one shoe, what else?
We found, for lack of a better term, a good chain that was down there as well.
What about a shirt?
Yes, ma'am. There was also a white shirt that we found within the well as well.
Okay. And a knife?
There was a broken pieces of a knife and then a broken knife handle, which was down in the well also.
Okay. Any socks at all?
Yes, ma'am. There were socks that were recovered as well.
There was other clothing recovered from the well.
Yes, ma'am. There was.
The other clothing recovered from the well, and I'm not going to open that box again and get us all filthy. But the other clothing that was recovered in the well, any defects to that clothing?
Not that I recall.
The crime scene out on Minter Road, is that in Spalding County?
Yes, ma'am. It is.
You were present in the interview with the defendant,
Yes, ma'am.
and
Okay.
did you identify
Let me
the
stop you
defendant?
right there. We need a break, Mr. Jim.
Yes, sir.
I'm almost
That's-
done. This is my last question.
Let's hold it.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a short recess, and during this break, please do not discuss the case with anyone. Okay? We'll take a 10-minute recess.